Okay, so we've been talking about the 3 different questions that you've got to ask yourself to see whether or not you're really looking at good data. Is the tool producing data that actually measures what it says it measures? Is it producing real range in the real world? Because let's face it, there is range in the real world. And then whatever range it produces, does the range on the tool predict actual real world behaviors 2, 3, 4 months later? That's called criterion-related validity. These are our 3 hurdles. That's the toughest one to jump over. But if we've got a tool, a performance tool, an employee survey tool, a 360 tool, whatever tool that jumps over those 3 hurdles, we've got good data. Let me just apply it to one tool, just one tool that we've tried to make here. We wanted to see what happens on the world's most productive teams. When you start measuring performance, counting performance, team by team by team inside the same company, you do get variation. You get some teams doing the same work as other teams that are massively outperforming these other teams. And then you get some teams that are massively underperforming, just through pure countable things we can count, than the rest of the teams. So you get variation. You do this, you see this in engineering teams, in sales teams, in healthcare teams, in manufacturing teams. Anywhere you look, you find range in performance. So our question was pretty simple. What happens, what are the conditions that exist on the most productive teams? And of course, what this was going to become is not just a measure of employee engagement, it was going to be a measure of leader effectiveness, because so much of the difference in team performance is a function of the leader leading the team. So we were like, oh gosh, what is the right way to measure leader effectiveness? What was the right way to measure the feelings that these particular high-performing team members had that was different than the low-performing teams? You got that, right? So that was our challenge. Gosh, what's happening on the best teams? But we wanted to make sure that whatever tool we built was reliable, produced real-world variation, and the variation on the tool predicted subsequent productive behavior. So here's what we did. We asked lots and lots and lots of survey questions of the high-performing teams, lots of survey questions, the same survey questions of the lower-performing teams. Those questions had 2 characteristics to them. Number 1, you're going to know what the 2 characteristics are. Number 1, we had to ask people questions about their own experience. We had questions that were about, do I know what's expected of me? Do I feel like I'm learning and growing? Do I believe in the mission of the company? All of these questions were about me, asking about me. None of them were about me rating the manager or rating anybody else. Why? Because those questions are unreliable. Second, we had to make sure that we had questions that had an extreme word in them that created variation, so we didn't end up with a bunch of 4s and 5s. So we put questions in there with words like every day and all the time and super committed, and words that were extreme words, so that we could get some people saying strongly disagree and some people saying strongly agree. We wanted to create variation in the question answers. And lastly, we then wanted to say, well, okay, well, for those particular questions where people strongly agreed, did the people then subsequently go do something more productive? Let's look at those particular questions that have criterion-related validity. Only those questions where the people who strongly agreed on the question then subsequently either were more productive, or they stuck around longer, or they gave better levels of customer service. Any question that produced range, but the people who strongly agreed then were not more productive or stayed longer, we threw it out. Even if we loved it because it was reliable, and we loved it because it did create variation, if the variation didn't actually have criterion-related validity, which means if it didn't predict subsequent behavior, we ditched it. If it didn't predict, we ditched it. We didn't do a bunch of driver analysis relating one question in a survey to another question in a survey. We were like, the people who score higher on the question actually end up more productive. And when we did that, we ended up with these 8 questions. Take a look at them for a while. As you can see, every one of them is about me rating my own experience on my own intentions. Every one of them, you can't see this in the data, but every one of them produces range. And every one of them exists in this survey only because it's met that final hurdle of criterion-related validity. You may look at these questions and you may like them. or you may not like them. It may fit your theory of what the best leaders actually get done with their people, or it may not. You may think that it is missing some terribly important criteria around what leaders do on their teams, or you may think it's got everything. Truth be told, and this is going to sound odd, so I'm sorry, but the truth be told, it doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter if you like the questions, if you think they measure everything, or you think they're missing some things. It doesn't matter. Because what you think is not the final criteria for determining what questions actually survived the cut. What does matter in terms of what questions survived the cut are, do we know we're asking you questions that you can reliably rate on? Do we know that those questions are worded in such a way they produce range? And do we know that the range on the questions produce something that predicts subsequent behavior? If it met all of those three hurdles, then we kept the question in. I'm not saying that this research is finished. All research is provisional, so we'll keep learning. But if you want to know why do we have those 8 questions in this engagement pulse, it's because it met each of these 3 criteria. It does, unfortunately, take about a decade to have the kind of confidence in a set of questions to know that they meet each of these 3 criteria. So unfortunately, if you're starting to build one of these now, it's going to take you about 10 years to have enough meta-analytic confidence, which means you've examined these relationships across studies and across time. But if you do that over time, then you can end up with a tool in which you too have confidence that it's met these criteria. Bottom line, in terms of these 3 hurdles, we've taken that, applied that to the challenge of what happens on the best teams, and we've ended up with a simple measuring stick of 8 items that are reliable, produce variation, and have criterion-related validity in the real world. Yay, us.